Order. Maureen Burke to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered poverty in Glasgow North East constituency. It is a privilege to serve under your chairmanship, Ms Butler, and I am very grateful for the opportunity to raise this most serious of subjects. I rise today not only as a member of the Parliament for Glasgow North East, but also as someone who knows what poverty looks like up close. I grew up in Easterhouse, one of the most deprived areas of Glasgow. I left school at the age of 15 when both my parents were diagnosed with tuberculosis. I joined my siblings to help provide for our family, doing what we had to do to survive, like so many in our community still today. It's that experience that drives me now, recognising that behind every stat about poverty, there are people, families, children, friends, facing impossible choices. Fighting for them is the sole reason I'm an MP. The idea for this debate was born a number of months ago when I discovered data from Health Ecos, which revealed my constituency of Glasgow North East as having the lowest life expectancy of any UK parliamentary constituency. The truth is that although these figures are shocking, they're sadly not surprising. In Glasgow North East, wages are lower and the percentage of people with a disability is higher than the Scottish and UK averages. Deaths from preventable health conditions such as coronary heart disease are higher than compared with Scotland as a whole. And tragically, nearly 38% of children in my constituency live in poverty. As Health Ecos tell us, deep inequality between the poorest and the richest cuts lives short. In the UK, one of the richest countries in the world, people are dying because they are poor. When we think about poverty, then we need to think of it in context. Glasgow North East having the UK's lowest life expectancy doesn't happen by accident and can only be changed through progressive government action. For too many years, people in my constituency have operated under a system that has allowed inequality to fester. Opportunities and wealth have been unevenly distributed, and public services have failed people time and time again. The last Labour government made this eradication of poverty a national mission. Families the length and breadth of the UK felt the benefit of that determination, but after a Tory austerity decade and nearly 2 decades of SNP neglect in Scotland, that progress has been reversed, and the living conditions of far too many are reminiscent of days we thought had been consigned to history. The Britain that this Labour government inherited was broken. It was a Britain whose leadership had tolerated the intolerable as more people slid into destitution. That can't be fixed overnight, but it can't be allowed to continue either. Trussell Trust tell us that 3.1 million food parcels were handed out across the UK between 2023 and 2024. 262,000 in Scotland and 5,846 in Glasgow North East. Sadly, tonight, 10,000 children in Scotland will go to sleep in temporary accommodation, a number that has risen every single year in the past decade, bar a slight decrease during the pandemic. And 1 in 6 Scots will continue their agonising wait for NHS treatment. Madam Chair, this is a wealthy country, but its people are poor. The experiences of people and their real lived experiences should always be at the centre of debates like this, because I believe they make the most powerful case for change. In the Stop Hill area of my constituency, there is a Marie Curie hospice. I am in absolute awe at the work done by Marie Curie, treating people in the final stages of their lives with compassion and dignity. The staff working at the hospital, however, will openly tell you that far too many of the people who come through their doors should have more time. But that isn't something hopeful attempt to comfort grieving families, though I'm sure it does this too. Rather, it is a reflection on the direct effects poverty has on people's living standards. Funded by UK Research and Innovation, Marie Curie and the University of Glasgow conducted a research project titled Dying in the Margins. This research that 1 in 4 working age people with a terminal illness in Scotland dies in poverty. This challenges the idea that terminal illness is an equaliser of social classes, recognising instead that it actually worsens inequality. In addition, there exists a 24-year gap in healthy life expectancy between the most and the least deprived communities. When faced with the diagnosis of a terminal illness, poorer people are forced into making difficult choices or find themselves suffering hardship because of the associated costs. A double burden, as one participant noted. Take, for example, Max. Max, a 65-year-old gentleman who really wanted to spend his last days in his community and, importantly, with his dog Lily. On one occasion, despite being seriously in pain, Max even fled the hospice to reunite with Lily. But Max's home was unsuitable for his condition. He lived in a 4th-floor flat and couldn't climb into his bath. Sadly, the Housing Association failed to carry out adaptations to his home, and so in the final days of his life, Max was forced back into the hospice. Max died, his wish of doing so in the comfort of his own home and with his beloved companion Lily by his side, unrealised. We can't change Max's experience, but we can take action to ensure that we treat people in similar situations with greater respect and dignity. Poverty can strike at any point, disrupting lives suddenly. This is what happened to my constituent Martin. Martin was a working homeowner who, due to a relationship breakdown, found himself homeless with 3 children, one of which has additional support needs. Martin had to leave his job to care for his children during this traumatic situation. Care for his children during this traumatic situation. Glasgow City Council placed the family in a hotel where Martin and his 3 children had to pack up and move rooms each night. Although Martin tried to keep his children in a routine and in school during this time, their attendance suffered, and the situation has obviously affected their education. Martin remains in temporary accommodation, which is unsuitable for the family, and he's been trying since November to find permanent accommodation, but the social housing stock is just not available. Martin wants to work and provide for his family, but isn't receiving the housing support he needs to get him to that point. In short, poverty puts his family's lives on hold. That's why, Madam Chair, when I think of poverty, I think of it as theft. It steals potential and robs opportunity. It denies the world the brilliance, warmth and talent of so many who may never be seen or heard. Madam Chair, our duty surely is to do all we can to make better the lives of people we may never know or ever meet. And I am encouraged by the work already being undertaken by this government to do just that. This government is, of course, legislating to ensure that work can be a genuine route out of poverty and to the realisation of a stable and enjoyable life. Our employment right bills delivers fairer working conditions, stronger rights and improved pay for millions. These are the steps that show our values, that work should offer dignity and security, not trap people in work poverty. And more recently, the Pathways to Work paper outlines additional steps through reforms to the welfare system. I welcome, for example, the scrapping of the work capability assessment, which many charities have described as dehumanising and distressing. And I also welcome the commitment to reduce assessments for people with longer-term health conditions. But it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge concerns around other aspects of these proposals. And I hope to hear answers from the Minister today on questions such as, can the Government ensure that people receiving end-of-life care will not lose access to their benefits as a result of these plans? Can the Minister set out how new employment support programmes will be delivered in a way that is supportive and empowering rather than patronising and disparaging? And can the Minister confirm that the Government recognises that for some people work simply isn't possible and that they should continue receiving financial support and assistance? Madam Chair, I ask these questions because I recognise our welfare system is failing people and support efforts to fix it. But reform cannot mean regression. Let us also remember that so much of the responsibility for welfare provision lies with the Scottish Government. They hold powers, and so they must bear responsibility. My constituents are waiting too long for support, with the majority of adult disability payment applications taking 4 months to process. In 2023, shockingly, 116 people died whilst waiting for the outcome of their application. I will hold the UK Government to account, but I expect the Scottish Government to do more than posture on this issue, which I am afraid has been the extent for their contributions so far. When my time as MP ends, I want to be judged on the following questions. Did I make life better for the people in my community who had the least? Was I part of a government that worked tirelessly to root out the causes of poverty and low life expectancy? Are people living better lives now than they were under the last government? Madam Chair, we can be the Parliament that ends the era of excuses, and we can be the country that declares poverty not inevitable but unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to get to the front bench by 1908, so maybe everybody has about 3.5 to 4 minutes. To speak, Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Ms Butler. Thank you for chairing this meeting, and congratulations to the member for bringing forward this debate. I particularly liked her driving force, which is, did I make life in my community better? I think that should be the driving force of all of the MPs, and I absolutely commend her for taking that stance. I just wanted to say a couple of things about the social security safety net and what is being provided in order to protect people, in order to protect them from the worst of poverty, in order to ensure that those life expectancies are equalised. I think that those of us who are lucky enough to live in a level of privilege have got the luxury of being able to make mistakes. We've got the luxury of being able to make mistakes or cope with a few rough barriers in our way. We can cope with maybe a washing machine breaking down and our child needing a new pair of shoes in the same month. Whereas people who are living on the breadline do not have that level of privilege and luxury. If two of those things happen at once through no fault of their own, actually getting through that, actually working out whether you buy a washing machine or whether you buy a pair of shoes for the child when you're really struggling to make ends meet as it is the most difficult choice. So I think, you know, if we can get to a position where people have got the luxury of being able to make some choices, of being able to make choices and being able to ensure that their children can thrive and not just survive, for example, then we have done a good thing and we have made life better for our communities. Particularly in terms of where we are, I think that there are issues with the social security safety net, the essentials guarantee that's been put forward by Trussell and JRF, among others, specifically around the fact that if you look at an essential basket of goods, you need about £120 a week in order to pay for that essential basket of goods. That's the most basic food, that's ensuring you've got an internet connection, that's heat and that's rent. You know, that's covering those basic things, whereas the Universal Credit Standard Allowance is only £92. And actually, most people agree that that essential basket is a reasonable level for the social security safety net to be at. So I think it would be sensible to look at where we are with the Universal Credit Standard Allowance and whether it does in fact meet basic needs. And that's before we talk about things like the child poverty strategy and the possibility of cancelling the two-child cap, which across the board people are asking for, and also scrapping the benefits cap that there is in total. In Scotland, we're doing what we can to mitigate some of this. We've managed to ensure that child poverty in Scotland is reducing rather than increasing, but it's much more stagnant than we would like it to be because we're having to mitigate some of these cuts that there are. And I would just echo the views of the Honourable Lady in terms of the disability payments that are being made. 55% of children in Scotland who live in poverty have a disabled family member. And looking at the potential of the cuts to the eligibility in PIP, for example, and actually we don't know how that's going to interact with the Scottish benefit system. Are we going to have people do ADP and PIP assessments in order to ensure their eligibility for the UC health element? Or is the UK government going to look at the ADP assessment and work the UC health element on the basis of that? I'm not clear how this is going to work, and I'm not clear that the welfare bill that's coming through in the near future, hopefully, will actually make that clear for me and for my constituents and for those people in Glasgow North East. How those things are going to interact and what the difference to their lives will be is really, really key. So as soon as the Minister can give us clarity on the interaction between the welfare bill and the Scottish Government's systems when it comes to adult disability payment, for example, that would be really helpful. But I, again, commend the member for bringing this up. It's a really important issue. I can understand why it's the most important issue in her constituency, and more power to her elbow for making her life better for her constituents.
Thank you. John Grady.
Thank you, Mrs Butler, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I thank my honourable and dear friend, the member for Glasgow North East, my neighbour, for securing this important debate. Glasgow has disgraceful levels of poverty, absolute poverty, families that cannot afford the essentials to live: food, heat, school uniforms and clothes. Now, we do not help those in desperate poverty by making unaffordable promises, but despite the constrained public finances, our government has taken action. Our last budget raised billions in extra taxes to fight poverty. In Scotland, that means an extra £4.9 billion for the Scottish Government, so it can tackle record NHS waiting lists and arrest the alarming decline of Scottish education. And our Employment Rights Bill tackles the evil of in-work poverty with the biggest upgrade in workers' rights in a generation. And our government has increased the living wage well above inflation. Our government has been in power for 10 months. The Tories were in power for 10 years, and the SNP have been in power for 18 years, at the helm of an incredibly powerful, devolved administration, blessed with significant powers. And the SNP have run Glasgow City Council for 8 years. On that point, will my honourable Yes, I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Would he agree with me that many of the essential services that families rely on are delivered by local authorities, and indeed that local authorities have had their budget slashed year on year by the Scottish Government, which impacts the ability to protect and support the most vulnerable people in our societies?
John Grady.
I'm obliged. May I say, Madam Chair, I agree. Local government has been emasculated by the governments, the Tory governments in England and Wales, and also the SNP government. One thing I'd say is they're pretty non-discriminatory in their emasculation, because they've failed to fund the SNP Council in Glasgow properly for years. In Scotland, one cause of poverty is the shocking state of the NHS. Record waiting lists do not just delay people getting back to work. The delays actually mean that people's conditions deteriorate to a point where people cannot return to work. And we should be incredibly angry about this. The Scottish Government promised in 2007 to establish a ministerial task force on health inequalities, yet Scotland continues to have the worst health inequalities in Western and Central Europe. And on disability health checks, following a successful pilot in 2019-20, the Scottish Government committed to carry out annual health checks for people with learning disabilities in 2022. And this should be completed by 2023, but as of 23-24, only 6.9% of eligible people have been offered a health check. So the SNP's record in Holyrood on health is something that is of absolute shame. Education is an essential pathway out of poverty. The attainment gap in Scotland is widening. It means that kids in my constituency and kids in other constituencies with large working class populations have fewer life chances, and their life chances are getting worse. An absolute scandal. College education is in crisis, and again, this should only be a source of anger. Now, turning to Glasgow City Council has an opportunity to help some of the most vulnerable in Glasgow. The Homeless Project Scotland has a food and night shelter in the Merchant City in Glasgow. It serves free hot meals and provides an immaculately clean shelter for homeless people. However, it has had its planning permission refused. The shelter is at risk of serious risk of closing. But I'm heartened to hear that Glasgow City Council has said we are available to engage and do whatever we can to help them find suitable property. I hope that Glasgow City Council does that. It has 2 golden keys to resolution. It has an extensive property portfolio and is the planning authority. I cannot think of an organisation better placed to help. I helped, Madam Chair, I'm about to wind up, at the shelter on Sunday night. Then, that night, the shelter served over 100 men and women. But because children are homeless in Glasgow too, it serves children. On Sunday night, a boy, just like my boy, with his dad. A teenage boy with his mum. A girl, perhaps the same age as my daughter. If the shelter is closed, Madam Chair, where will these children and their mums and dads get a hot meal? Where will the most vulnerable in my city get a safe bed for the night? I hope Glasgow City Council delivers on its promise. I'm obliged, Madam Chair.
Martin Rhodes.
Thank you, Ms Butler. It's a privilege to serve under your chairing. I'd like to commend my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow North East, for securing this debate and her heartfelt speech about the impact of poverty in her constituency. My constituency of Glasgow North, which adjoins my honourable friend's constituency, also faces many of the same factors that contribute to its low life expectancy. Factors that are clearly linked to poverty. Recent Office of National Statistics data has shown that Glasgow North's average life expectancy is 75.9 years, a whole 8.7 years shorter than the healthiest parts of the UK. However, this number also acts in a way as a smokescreen, because this is an average that includes the most affluent areas. It conceals the true life expectancy of the most deprived communities in my constituency. Where you were born, where you live, even which street you grew up on, can help determine how long you live. While these figures highlight a shocking level of health inequality, they ultimately reflect the deeper and more complex realities of poverty. Poverty doesn't come from one place. It stems from a web of economic, social and cultural factors. These are shaped by issues related to class, health, social security, wages, job security, education, housing, access to credit, to name just a few. It's the way these pressures interact, often reinforcing one another, that sustains the poverty we see in Glasgow and across the country. The history of place can then accentuate these issues, with Glasgow's history being an example of this. The deindustrialisation of the city, combined with the lack of the necessary support, planning and investment in the late 70s and 80s, led to mass unemployment and growing inequalities that are still felt in communities today. Though the last Labour government made great progress combating child poverty rates, this has not been sustained. Subsequent national policy choices and global events have only made these systemic issues of poverty worse, with the financial crash, the cuts to public services from Tory austerity, and the long-term impact of a global pandemic hampering Glasgow's prosperity. Poverty can also create vicious cycles, and these can appear in many different aspects of someone's life. For example, if your job is insecure, it's harder to afford stable housing. Without a fixed address, it's harder to access social security. Without that safety net, the risk of homelessness rises and the cycle continues. That is why it's not enough to talk about employment alone. We need to ensure that work provides security and pays a real living wage. I welcome this government's decision to uplift the minimum wage, a vital move that ensures more people can earn enough to live with dignity. The Employment Rights Bill will go further, ending exploitative zero-hour contracts and helping ensure that anyone in paid work has stability and protection. But let's be clear, no single policy will solve poverty. What's needed is a joined-up approach, one that brings together housing, health, education, employment and social security. This is why the government's focus on building houses, improving the education system, restoring the NHS and economic growth is vital to helping deliver for those most vulnerable. I'm also confident the work of this Labour government's Child Poverty Task Force will be vital in delivering a cross-government child poverty strategy to reduce and alleviate child poverty. This will be essential in improving children's lives and life chances now and address the root causes of poverty in the long term. Glasgow is a city of immense potential, rich in culture, talent and resilience. But the fact that some of its communities have the lowest life expectancies in the UK is not an inevitability. It is a result of decisions it's taken in the past. If we make different choices, we can build a city and a country where every child has the opportunity to thrive and every community the chance to prosper. I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say in her response to this debate.
Thank you. Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Ms Butler, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And may I begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow North East, for securing this important debate and also for being such a doughty champion for her constituents. Poverty is experienced by many communities across Glasgow, as we've heard, and my own constituency of Glasgow West is no exception. In fact, in 2022-23, 19.3% indeed of all people in Glasgow were income deprived, compared to 12.1% in Scotland across the board. And in Glasgow in 2023, 41.1% of secondary pupils were registered for free school meals. The figure for Scotland is just 13.2%. Within my constituency of Glasgow West, the Drumchapel Anniesland ward has the highest depth of poverty rate in Glasgow. A lot of statistics, I suppose, but as the member for Glasgow North East said, the reality is there's a family and an individual behind every single one. Earlier this year, I held a Child Poverty Task Force event, and the submission from that has been fed into the government's task force. And it was attended by many organisations who work with children and families in Glasgow West.
The stories they told and the evidence they offered were truly shocking. One participant, a volunteer with a youth club, reflected on her experience of taking a group of children on a day out and giving each child £5 to buy lunch. One child asked if he could forgo lunch so that he could give the money to his mum so that she could buy bread and milk for the family. As you will gather, I find that story horrific. But that is the reality for many children who are all too aware of the financial pressures their parents are facing, taking away, in effect, their ability to enjoy their childhood and of being children. As we've heard, since 2013-14, the funding received by Glasgow City Council has reduced significantly, putting severe pressure on services across the city. Hopefully, the record settlement this government has passed to the Scottish Government will allow it to address what is now chronic underfunding. And I have to say, over that period, I've been very disappointed that the SNP administration in Glasgow hasn't seemed to feel it either necessary or required that it should challenge its colleagues in the Scottish Government at Holyrood about that funding situation, because it shouldn't have been allowed to continue. We've heard a lot about the mortality rate in Glasgow, and I won't rehearse that, but I'll just say this. We've known for a very long time that health inequalities, that housing conditions, that educational opportunities and that poverty are all connected. I worked in the health service a lifetime ago, and we were very proud of a report that came out, proud but challenged, called the Black Report, which drew attention to all these facts. We've known about them since then, which is 1983, I reckon. We've had the opportunity over those years to do something about that. We made some progress under the Blair government, and we began to look at poverty, and particularly child poverty, in the early days of the Scottish Parliament too. But we need to do so much more, because all of these issues are connected. And if there's one part of that jigsaw is in the wrong place, then the life chances and the life opportunities for all of those families and all of those young people are very, very badly affected. So I would like to close, Ms Butler, by thanking again my colleague from Glasgow North East and saying she was absolutely right to be challenging about what we all have to do, what all governments have to do and what all local authorities have to do. And it is only by working together that we will begin to make a difference for the people who rely on us to do that.
I'd like to leave a couple of minutes at the end for the mover to wind up. I call the Lib Dem spokesperson, Susan Murray.
Thank you very much, Ms Butler. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And thanks to my honourable friend from North East Glasgow for bringing this important debate and for her very moving speech. It's clear that she's committed to her constituents. But we need to break the cycle of inequality. As we've heard in the streets of North East Glasgow, parts of my constituency in Mid-Dumbartonshire, including Auchinairn, neighbouring North East Glasgow, too many young people begin life weighed down by poverty rather than uplifted by potential. 33% of children across Glasgow are growing up poor, but this rises to over 37% in the Glasgow East constituency, the highest in Scotland. Behind every percentage point are hundreds of pupils whose concentration is broken by hunger, whose homework is done under blankets because the heating is off, if it is done at all. New figures from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation reveal 6 million people are living in very deep poverty in the UK today, with nearly 500,000 in Scotland. Poverty of this scale is not just a social failure, it's an economic own goal and a drag on growth. The OECD has long shown that inequality depresses GDP by stunting skills and productivity. A cold, hungry child suffering from illness and missing school is unlikely to become the skilled, creative adult our economy needs. We need investment, not in handouts, but in the human capital that will pay Scotland dividends for decades. 3 interventions stand out. First, extend free school meals to every child in poverty throughout primary and secondary school. Scotland rightly offers universal provision in primaries 1 to 5, yet pupils in primary 6 and 7 and early secondary schools still fall through the net. Research by the Institute for Fiscal Studies finds that a reliable, nutritious lunch raises attainment by the equivalent of 2 months' learning each year and boosts lifetime earnings. That is growth economics in a dinner hall. Healthier children today, higher productivity tomorrow, and lower long-term welfare and NHS costs. Second, make every home in North East Glasgow and beyond warm and efficient. The Warmer Homes Scotland programme helped over 7,000 households last year, cutting bills and carbon alike, and demand has soared as energy prices climb. Accelerating retrofits in social housing across the region would create skilled jobs and boost economic activity through local supply chains. And for families, it means money saved on energy bills can be spent on essentials like food, school shoes, or a local after-school club. And third, ensure universal access to NHS dental care for all children. Despite school dentists, all too frequently, families simply can't get an NHS dentist. Routine care is being missed, and tooth decay remains one of the leading causes of hospital admissions for children. That's not just a public health failure, it's a productivity issue. Dental pain keeps children off school, affects their speech and self-esteem, and entrenches disadvantage. Good oral health must be seen as a core part of a child's educational and developmental success. Tackling poverty means addressing the full range of barriers that hold children back. Yes.
Just on the dentist thing, I spoke on an NHS dentist debate in Westminster Hall a wee while ago, and something like 95% of people in Scotland are registered with NHS dentists, whereas the figure in England is if about 50% of adults will ever see an NHS dentist in their life in England. Is she making this case specifically for Scotland? Because I'd actually love to hear more about where the gaps are in service provision in Scotland.
Susan Murray.
That is not my experience in my constituency in Mid-Dumbartonshire. We did a survey recently which showed that there was quite a lot of difficulty in people finding an NHS dentist, and that many who were with NHS dentists found that those dentists were moving to private practice. And in fact, I know of many constituents in East Dumbartonshire that are travelling to Springburn to reach an NHS dentist, so they have to travel quite a long distance. So tackling poverty means addressing the full range of barriers that hold children back. Hunger, cold homes and preventable health issues among them. These are devolved levers that Holyrood can and should pull. The Scottish Child Payment is a start, but Westminster must also play its part. Liberal Democrats are calling on the UK government to tackle child poverty by removing the 2-child limit and the benefits cap, and to reduce the wait for the first payment of universal credit from 5 weeks to 5 days. Instead, a UK-wide poverty premium continues to strip cash from low-income households through their higher tariffs and costlier services. Scotland cannot build fairness on funding shortfalls. Hungry children cannot learn, and cold, unwell children cannot thrive. But nourished pupils, warm homes and healthy children are the engines for future growth. By investing in all our children, school meals, energy efficiency and basic healthcare access, we not only spare a generation the misery of deprivation, we unlock the skills, health and enterprise that can power North East Glasgow and the whole of the United Kingdom to a more prosperous future. This is not just a moral choice. It's the smart one, both socially and economically. Thank you.
Opposition spokesperson Danny Kruger.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms Butler. And can I just start by acknowledging the very powerful set of speeches by the members from Glasgow, which we've heard this afternoon. And I wouldn't say that my view is that people of Glasgow are generally well represented by Scottish Labour, but on this occasion I think they've been very well represented today in this debate. And I pay particular tribute to the member for Glasgow North East and the way that she highlighted the tragedy, particularly of low life expectancy, but of poverty in general in her constituency. And I think she mentioned Easterhouse in her remarks, and Easterhouse occupies a particular place in the sort of pantheon of conservative thinking about welfare, because it was there that the member for Chingford and Wood Green visited some 20 years ago. And it was there he had his epiphany about what she described as the context of poverty, and he described the interconnectedness of the different factors that drive poverty, which of course goes so much beyond simple income poverty, the issues around welfare itself, but also joblessness, family breakdown, addiction, and so on. And I think what the member for Glasgow North talked about, the long consequences of deindustrialisation, particularly relevant across our country, but especially in places like Glasgow. He also mentioned the consequence of the global financial crisis in 2008, which we talk about. I think the Honourable Lady mentioned the stagnation of wages in her constituency, which is a problem across the United Kingdom since that time. The low growth in wages which we've seen. And then when the member for Chingford became the Welfare Secretary in 2010, they introduced reforms to welfare which had real and direct benefits, real significant improvements in welfare since 2010 and in worklessness. So 1 million fewer workless households in 2024 than in 2010. After housing costs, 1 million fewer people in absolute poverty. 100,000 fewer children, 200,000 fewer pensioners, 700,000 fewer working-age people in poverty. So the last government did make a real impact on poverty. Nevertheless, I want to acknowledge some of the points that have been made in this debate. The fact is that the fiscal situation which we inherited and choices made by the coalition government meant that, in my view, there was insufficient support given to people who needed it, particularly in consequence of cuts in local authority budgets, but also reforms at budgets at DWP. I recognise that. And then when we come to Glasgow, I echo the point made by the Honourable Lady about the neglect under the SNP since devolution over the last decade. So to those points, I agree with what the Honourable Lady has been saying. I don't agree with her about the value of the reforms that are being introduced by the new government. I think what we've seen is a rushed effort driven by the imperative to balance the books in consequence of a failed budget last year, leaving a real crisis in the public finances that is now being felt by the recipients of benefits. We are balancing the books. The government is balancing the books on the backs of the people least able to sustain that weight. Happy to give way.
On failed budgets, my constituents go to the shops with terror at the rising prices that followed from the budget of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. Would my friend agree with me that that is the very definition of a failed budget, one that plunged many of my constituents into poverty?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I'm not going to defend the mini-budget that he refers to, but I don't accept that the rise in prices that all of our constituents have experienced are solely or even large part due to that event. They're in consequence of wider global events, and I'm afraid to say, since this government came in, failed economic policy, which has driven the necessity of the disability benefit cuts that have been introduced, also the winter fuel payment cut. 10 million people losing that vital part of their income. 100,000 more pensioners have been admitted to A&E since the cut to the winter fuel payment. 50,000 children have been plunged into poverty in consequence of what is happening at the DWP. I'm very concerned about the announcement of cuts to the benefits regime before we've had the review of the assessment system that gives people the entitlement to benefits. So we have genuine failure at the DWP, in addition to which jobs are being destroyed by decisions at the Treasury, raising national insurance on employers, driving up energy costs, and introducing a new bill which will make employers much less keen to take on new workers. So my suggestion to the Minister, if she'll allow me, is to rethink the changes to winter fuel payments. And I'm conscious that in Scotland, the Scottish Government is taking over responsibility for this area of policy, and I echo the point made by the member for Aberdeen North that it'd be good to hear from the Minister how the interaction of the benefits reforms will work in light of Scottish Government policy. I hope that we will rethink the disability benefits cuts, particularly until we get the review of the eligibility of the assessment schemes. And we need more support for the people who need help to navigate the system and to get into work. And more broadly, just to conclude, going back to the point I made in consequence of the Honourable Lady's reference to East House, we need to attack the drivers of poverty, these interconnected factors that account for the demand for welfare, which is so high. It is social breakdown rather than purely DWP systems, which account for the high and unsustainable benefit bills we have. And we need to grow the economy, create jobs, good jobs, as the Honourable Lady says. That will be right for Glasgow and right for the UK. Thank you.
Minister
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure as ever to serve under your chairship, and I would also like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow North East, for securing this debate on a topic that could barely be more important, and I really congratulate her on that. I also want to say that I will take this debate as a submission to the Child Poverty Task Force, because members have raised significant and important points, and I know that my colleagues in the Ministerial Task Force and in the Child Poverty Unit in the Cabinet Office will read this debate with interest, because members have raised very important points. I'd like to thank members from Aberdeen North, Glasgow East, Glasgow North and Glasgow West for their contributions in that regard. And I'd just like to say to the member for Glasgow West that I had the pleasure of reading the submission from her Child Poverty Task Force event that she held recently. And I too read the story of the child that she mentioned, and we should not apologise for engaging emotionally with this issue, because nothing matters more than the fortunes of our kids in this country. So and also to the member for Mid Dunbartonshire as well, I welcome all of the contributions that have been made as we move forward towards our child poverty strategy that we will publish. I know also that the member for Glasgow North East met some of my DWP colleagues recently at Springburn Job Centre, and I hope that she found them really, really helpful, because they will have enjoyed very much meeting her. And I would encourage all members of all parties to engage with their local DWP teams in their job centres. They are brilliant human beings, and all constituency MPs can get a lot out of working with them. So I thank her for doing that. As has been made completely evident by this debate, poverty is a stain on this country, and tackling it is a priority. And our plan for change as a government includes giving children the best start of life, as well as raising living standards in each and every part of the United Kingdom. And reducing poverty is absolutely vital to both of those ambitions. It's vital to the lives and life chances of millions of people living in hardship right now. And that hardship has been caused, as members have said, by a combination of social and economic failures. Now, Chair, I do feel an affinity with Glasgow. It is a wonderful city, and it shares many features with my own Merseyside. That, industrial past, shipbuilding, and the long-running effects of deindustrialisation that have had huge consequences. And I think one of the points that has come out of this debate really, really clearly is, yes, it's the poverty consequences, but it's the consequential health impact of that poverty. And, I know that picture in Glasgow, and it's true for my home as well, so I feel it. These problems are acute, and places like Glasgow feel the consequences of those policy failures over a very long period of time. And we've heard some of the statistics already, but Glasgow, the city, has the second highest level of people on out-of-work benefits in Britain, and that is not a good enough future for what is a wonderful city. In my role as Minister for Employment, though in my life many times before, but in my role as Minister for Employment, I've been fortunate to be in Glasgow, to hear directly of the problems that the city faces, but also the opportunities and the work that's being done to help support people in Glasgow. And I was very pleased to be there last October to meet a number of partners tackling child poverty in Glasgow. And we know that we can see good results where we're able to join up support for people. And it's that kind of approach that I want to feed into our child poverty strategy when it's published. I do apologise in advance for not being able to give all of the details of what will be in the strategy, but I know members will understand that and be patient for that strategy coming that we're all anxious to have. The DWP in Scotland is working very closely with partners in Glasgow, and including on identifying where we can join up support to make it better, and to try to identify employers that can help give people a really good chance in life. And I, as part of the Child Poverty Task Force, I was fortunate to meet child poverty charities, experts, parents and children in Glasgow in November, as they told me their stories, their challenges, their priorities into the development of our strategy. That strategy which is focused on increasing incomes, reducing costs and supporting families with better local services. And so Glasgow will influence that strategy. We have heard from people, as we have done again today, and understand what it is that they need. It has to be a cross-government strategy. Members have mentioned health, housing, education, and we'll work across the UK government and with the Scottish government as well to make sure it is an effective strategy. I just want to take a moment to describe action we've already been delivering to tackle the scourge of poverty, some urgent steps that we have taken before we're able to publish that strategy. We've extended the Household Support Fund, which councils in England can use to support low-income households, with extra funding for Scotland through the Barnett formula. Now, that support is there for crises, which is very important, but beyond that, we know we need to act already on incomes and make sure that people can do better. So just last week, our fair repayment rate in universal credit came into effect, reducing how much people in debt can have taken off their benefits to pay what they owe, from a maximum of 25% of somebody's universal credit standard allowance reduced to 15%. And on average, affected households will benefit by £420 a year, reducing the impact of debt on people. As my dad always used to say, Chair, out of debt, out of danger. And as a result of that change, 110,000 of Scotland's poorest households will now be better off. That marks the government's first step into a wider review of universal credit to ensure that it works to help lift people out of poverty. Thanks to our commitment to the triple lock, over 1 million pensioners in Scotland will benefit from as much as £470 a year added to their state pension this year, following the increase we implemented last month. And that's on top of the biggest ever pension credit take-up campaign, helping drive up claims by 81% in the 30 weeks since July, compared to the same period a year earlier. Now, the member for Glasgow North East asked me a couple of specific questions about the Green Paper and the changes that we're bringing forward. She asked me specifically about end-of-life care. And I do agree with her that the work that's done by Marie Curie and others is deeply impressive. Now, the DWP supports people nearing the end of life through the special rules for end of life. These rules enable people who are nearing the end of their lives to get faster, easier access to certain benefits without needing to attend a medical assessment or serve waiting periods, and in most cases they receive the highest rate of benefits. And those rules have been extended to apply to people who have 12 months of life to live rather than 6 months, so that people can receive that vital support through the special rules 6 months earlier. She also asked me about new employment support and how we will protect people where work is simply not possible. And this is a really, really important point, because we know that there are people who really need to be protected. The Green Paper outlines how we'll consult on that, how we'll improve that, how we'll work on our safeguarding policies to make sure that that process of protecting those people is improved. And I would say to her, my particular passion on employment support is making sure that people are treated with real dignity, that our fantastic frontline staff in job centres are able to see the person in front of them, not for it to be a box-ticking exercise, but to make sure that person has access to really great opportunities. And that's the whole point of our employment support changes. There was also a question from the member from Aberdeen North about the process in Scotland. That will be finalised as we get towards the white paper in autumn. But as she points out, we need to make sure that we've got that solution right for Scotland, and we'll work with the Scottish Government to do that. So let me move on and finish what I was saying, because I just want to come back to the member for Glasgow North East, because in her maiden speech last year, she said that education and further education are a route out of poverty, and it gives you a sense of achievement, self-belief, and the confidence that anything is possible. And I quote her, Chair, because I think she was absolutely spot on. That sense that anything is possible. She was right as well when she said earlier that poverty is theft, because you rob people of that sense of what is possible when you leave them with the indignity of poverty. And that's why our whole strategy is about giving people chances and choices in life, learning skills, gaining qualifications, creating more good jobs through the modern industrial strategy, unleashing the full potential of great cities like Glasgow, so they have the growth and the prosperity that they should have, and the good jobs with our plan to make work pay that will put money in the pockets of people in Glasgow and give them the dignity, the self-respect, the chances and choices that they deserve. We do need radical change to the help that we give people to escape poverty and to get a good job. But we need the whole government to act together with devolved administrations as well, all collaborating in work that will see people do much better. I know that Glasgow is a wonderful place that I have been welcomed to many times. But I also know the truth of what we've heard today, that people in Glasgow are robbed of years of good life that they should have because of the shame of poverty. And I am really glad, Chair, to be able to work with good colleagues from all parties who care about ending poverty, to get the right set of policies in our strategy, and then to make those policies real, so that people have the chances, choices, and the dignity they deserve.
Thank you. Maureen Burke to wind up.
I'll have to talk very quickly. Just to say thank you for that, and I also want to put on line that the Springburn Job Centre are doing an amazing job getting people into work. I was blown away by what they're doing, so I want to make that statement here today. Just to thank everybody for their contributions today. I think it's been a very good debate, and I think we're all, we're here because we care for our constituents. But on a more personal note, I just have to say that people are and will be dying sooner than they should. My sister died in her 30s, leaving her 10-year-old girl behind. My brother died in his early 50s with pancreatic cancer. My mum died of a heart attack. I know what it is to lose people, and it's all because of where they live and how they have you know, what has shaped her life. Was it their fate being where they were, where we were brought up? And there's lots more there I wanted to say, but I obviously don't have time. But this has been a great debate, and it's for my constituents I'm here. It's for the loss that I felt, that I don't want anybody else to feel this loss going forward. So thank you to the Minister for being here. Thanks to everybody's contribution. And thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered poverty in Glasgow North East constituency. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.